To pay or not to pay? That is the question. At least when it's regarding Ravens edge rusher Odafe Oweh. So Odafe Oweh, in my opinion, he's one of the more interesting players on the Baltimore Ravens. He's kind of polarizing, at least amongst Ravens fans. Like fans of other teams, they don't really know who he is because he's not a household name. But amongst Ravens fans, he's been kind of a polarizing figure. You have some people who they talk about him as if he's like a bust and a terrible player and a bum, and then you got some other people who they just love him to death, and in their eyes he's a elite edge rusher right up there with the Micah Parsons and the Myles Garrett's of the world. But for most Ravens fans such as myself, I think we view, well, I know and I'm sure many of you kind of view him as somewhere in the middle of that, where he's not a bad player, he's not a bust, but he's also not a superstar. And really those are the three tiers that I view draft picks from. It's like bust tier, which is somebody like a David Ojabo. Superstars, that's people like Lamar Jackson and Kyle Hamilton. And then Odafe Oweh, he's in that solid tier right in between, where he is a respectable contributor to the roster. But it puts the Ravens in an interesting position when it comes to trying to decide if they're going to pay him after next season. They already opted into his 5th-year option, so they will be paying him this year. If I'm not mistaken, his cap hit this year will be somewhere around 13 million, I believe, but they have to make a very serious decision on if they want to let him walk or if they want to extend him. And before I get into if he will or will not get paid, or if I think he will or will not get paid, I do want to revisit Odafe's journey on the Ravens leading up to this point, because I think it's important. Now, the reason I think it's important is because when you look back at the circumstances that led to Odafe being drafted by the Ravens, in my theory is that's the reason a lot of Ravens fans really dislike him. Like, they have resentment for him. It's just mainly because of the circumstances that led to us drafting him. Because when we drafted him, we literally traded our starting right tackle in Orlando Brown Jr. We traded him to the Chiefs in order to reach up in the draft to get him in the first round, which at the time I didn't really like the idea, but I tried to be open to it. And as the years have gone on, that's clearly proven to be a bad strategy. Again, doesn't mean that Odafe's a bad player, but the Ravens' strategy to get him, that's a complete waste of time. I'm assuming they did that just for the sake of being able to have the 5th-year option at their disposal, which is only available if you're a first-round pick, but still doesn't mean it's a good decision to reach that high for a guy who is as raw of a prospect as Odafe Oweh. Everybody knew that Odafe was a project player who was going to need time to reach his full potential, and to pick him up in the first round, I mean, it makes zero sense. He was clearly a guy who was about to fall to maybe the 3rd round at best. We could have easily waited to the 3rd round to get him and not sacrificed our O-line, because in the Eric DeCosta era, at least, it seems like there's been several moments where we have unnecessarily sabotaged our offensive line. Even this past season, we let Kevin Zeitler walk, and I still don't understand, why did we let Kevin Zeitler walk? It doesn't make sense. We let him walk for nothing. And what was our biggest issue this year? Y'all know what the biggest issue this year was on that O-line. I don't have to say it. And just like how letting Kevin Zeitler walk prematurely without having a actual replacement ready was a head-scratching decision, so was trading Orlando Brown Jr. to the Chiefs of all people. You know, remember the Chiefs, they had just lost to the Buccaneers in the Super Bowl. if I'm not mistaken. And the O-line, the fact that they had an injured and struggling O-line was one of their only weaknesses at that time. And you hand them a starting right tackle, very head-scratching decision. Now, I know some people may get mad and say, well, Orlando Brown, he wanted out because he wanted to switch from right tackle to be a full-time left tackle. Listen, that's not a valid excuse to me. I don't care what he wanted. He was a starting caliber tackle that you let walk without a replacement, without a real replacement lined up. And then the irony of it all is that same season, Ronnie Stanley gets hurt, and now we need a tackle, and Orlando Brown Jr., he's not on the team anymore, so he can't slide into that role. And this is how we ended up in a scenario where we brought in that bum Alejandro Villanueva. And for y'all that forgot, our offensive line that year gave up 58 sacks. That was the third most in the league that year. We gave up 58 sacks. Only the Bears and like one other team had more sacks than us. We gave up 58 sacks. That's also the year that Lamar got hurt after 11 games because he got hurt in the pocket. They did a poor job blocking, and one of the Browns players landed on Lamar's leg. So you can make a strong argument that handing the Chiefs a starting tackle, you can make an argument that one decision essentially destroyed our entire season. Now, there's more things you could talk about, but that's really one of the main issues, of course, because once Lamar got hurt, it was a wrap. And like I said, in my opinion, I believe that this is the root cause of why a lot of Ravens fans have resentment for him. And by him, I mean Odafe Oweh, is because to make such a massive gamble like that when it comes to trading away a starting tackle when you don't even have depth at tackle, to trade him away all in the name of reaching up to draft a third-round prospect in the first round, what many people are expecting is for you to come right out the gate and set the world on fire. And that's not what Odafe did. He had a solid rookie campaign, but he clearly wasn't right out the gate a dominant edge rusher. And some people may say, hey, most edge rushers, they take time to develop. They don't come right out the gate and dominate. And while I understand that talking point, and I understand and agree with it, again, the circumstances in which we got him, I believe, put a lot of pressure on, a lot of expectations on him that he was never realistically going to achieve right out the gate. He essentially was kind of set up for failure when it comes to expectations. And that's not his fault. That's really not. That's the Ravens front office fault. Because again, when you think about somebody with his measurables and the raw potential that he had that people were interested in, and combine that with the fact that the Ravens were willing to sacrifice a starting tackle just to go get him, and when you combine that with the fact that Ravens fans were so spoiled throughout the 2000s of seeing a guy like Terrell Suggs dominate for so many years, it put him in a spot where it's like, you know what I mean? Like, they wanted him to, well, not, and by they I mean Ravens fans, like, they wanted him to come right out the gate and be this ultimate game wrecker, and that's just not who he was, at least not at that time. And to be honest, to this day, he's still not truly a game wrecker, but he's still a solid player. But either way, he stayed focused, he kept working, and now he's in a position where he's coming off of his best season. He had double-digit sacks for the first time, and he's entering a contract year where he has a chance to possibly make a lot of money. But the question is, the $1 million or multi-million-dollar question is, will he be worth it? And will the Ravens break the bank to get him? And there's only one scenario where I think Odafe should get paid by the Ravens, and I want everybody to hear me out. because this is not a diss, obviously, but I'm just looking at this from a more pragmatic standpoint. Like if I was in the shoes of EDC, if there's look, there's only three possibilities of how Oweh's season can play out, right? Like you have either progression, regression, or stagnation. Like he stays in the same spot. If Oweh progresses next year and reaches his full potential and has this monster season where he puts up like 15 sacks and 5 forced fumbles, and he plays very well in the playoffs, gets some sacks in the playoffs, and even forces a turnover in the playoffs, like a fumble or something, which, remember, by the time we play next season in the playoffs, it will have been about 5 years, more or less. No, 3, no. It will be about roughly 4 or 5 years since the last playoff game where our defense forced a turnover. So hey, if Oweh comes out, has a great regular season, has a elite regular season, and on top of that is a driving force for us in the playoffs to help propel us to a Super Bowl, of course at that point pay him, because at that point, man, he has finally arrived. He has arrived, and on top of that, we waited. This was 5 years in the making. We made big sacrifices to get him in the first place, and we waited it out, and he has finally reached his full potential. But on the flip side, if he doesn't have that type of season, if he has like a season where obviously he regressed and only puts up 7 sacks or whatever, like at that point I would say you would probably be better off just letting him walk, because I don't want to see EDC overpay him if he doesn't reach that next level. Even if he has a season like what he had this past season, he put up 10 sacks and 1 forced fumble. That's solid, but that's not elite enough to where you could look at him as a game-wrecking player. And the proof is in the pudding, because Ravens fans going into the draft, they're still complaining about how we desperately need to get an edge rusher. And that in itself speaks volumes, because apparently a lot of Ravens fans, they really don't believe in Oweh like that, and they don't think that his production fills that void. And again, he's not a bad player, but like I said, if he has a similar season to last year where he was solid in the regular season, got you 10 sacks, but he wasn't a real factor in the playoffs, and he was okay but not elite, I don't think it's worth it to pay him at that point. Even especially if he regresses and does worse than that, I don't think it's worth it, because Eric DeCosta has a tendency to overpay all the wrong players. We saw this with Marcus Williams, where we made Marcus Williams one of the highest paid safeties in the league, and we've seen how that has worked out. We rushed to give Roquan Smith $100 million contract, and Roquan Smith, not only has he never lived up to that, not only has he not lived up to that so far, he's never going to live up to that. Also for all the Ravens fans who keep complaining and saying we can't afford an edge rusher or whatever, understand the money that we could have spent towards an edge rusher, we gave it to Roquan. And then even in the case with Madubuike, now I still have a lot of hope for Madubuike. I still believe that he can have a strong bounce back season next year, where he gets back to reasserting himself as a top defensive tackle who can get double-digit sacks every year. But as of right now, the season that he's coming off of, based off of his $98 million contract, it was an underwhelming season. But we had just overpaid him the offseason before. Right before this season started. EDC has overpaid out several players. And if Oweh comes out here and he looks solid but not amazing, or if he looks bad, not bad, but if he regresses, or even if he just has a similar season that looks like last season, yeah, I could respect that because it's showing consistency. But at the same time, we can't keep him at that point, because if we do, EDC, based off his track record, it gives me the feeling that EDC would just rush to pay him $25 million a year, and giving him 25 to 30 million dollars a year just for him to be a slightly above average pass rusher, it wouldn't make sense. We would just be better off letting him walk, using that money to play 2 or 3 other free agent edge rushers, and drafting some guys and hoping that one of the free agent edge rushers can do what Kyle Van Noy has done, and hope that sooner or later we could hit in the draft finally and find that elite upper echelon pass rusher. But we just gotta wait and see how it goes, how it plays out. I'm not saying Oweh should not get paid, but what I am saying is I don't trust Eric DeCosta's ability to negotiate. So in order for us as fans to feel comfortable with whatever Eric's gonna pay him, because if EDC decides to pay him, at this point I'm gonna have to assume that it'll probably be an overpay. And if he overpays him, I could be cool with it, as long as Oweh comes out here and hits that next level and shows that elite potential that so many people thought he had coming out of the draft in 2021. So like I said, if we see a massive year from Oweh, 15 sacks, 3, 4, 5 forced fumbles or whatever, no problem with him getting paid. But on the flip side, if the Ravens decide to trade him this offseason or halfway through the regular season, which some people are speculating that they might, I wouldn't be against that either, to be honest with you. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below. Do you think Oweh will get paid, or do you think that the Ravens will trade him first?